Okay, so in our previous class, we we did try to introduce BDA and what it involves, and maybe what is expected of us throughout this course. I think that was done uh, fully, so that we can only pick from where we left. Of course, maybe for the sake of those joining us, I'm seeing we have some new guys who are joining us even in the course of the week. We said BDA is more of a revision as to what we have done initially and more of just reminding ourselves about the key areas we covered initially in our previous in the previous units. That includes FR, FM, particularly, and even DAX. So we expect it to be more of a revision as opposed to maybe a new concept as such. So we can just proceed from where we stopped the other time. So the other time, as we were saying, we did that basic introduction. So today I want us to move a little further and look at the basic computations that we can do, or introduction to the analysis tools or the analysis that we'll be doing moving forward. So on that note, there is that Excel that I did share in our WhatsApp group. We were calling it the what if analysis. So under what if analysis, you open that Excel sheet. You can kindly move to sheet 1. I think it has an illustration that we want to use for the better part of this class and basically understanding better the basic computations, the analysis that we can do before we see what else you can do. You can take a minute as you open that, then you proceed within a very short period of time, maybe a minute or less. Okay, so we can proceed. So actually the first computation I want us to do is, I think we introduced also maybe the difference between a formula and a function in our first class or in our previous class. So from here we can do the application of various formula and functions that we may need from time to time. And of course, even in our general work life. So the first function I want us to do using this illustration, basically this is an illustration involving a number of students. I hope you can also see my screen. Yes, I hope you can see my screen clearly. So I was saying the first application I want us to, or rather the first function I want us to use is the sum function. Basically, sum function is more about an addition tool that allows us to find the totals of a given set of data. So we can try out how and see how it works. For example, assuming now we want to find out what's the total marks that this student scored in maybe advanced audit, we'll basically use that function that we were talking about. We talk about the sum is equal to sum, meaning the formula or rather the function that we are taking, that we are using currently is the sum function. So basically it's equal to sum. Then we can drag this up to the last one. So basically you start after typing sum, maybe to illustrate better. After you type sum, being that we know what we want to use, you can see that the sum is now in green. Whether it's bold, can I say it is bold in green? Not really bold, but highlighted in green, in blue, I mean. So being that's highlighted in blue, we can simply click on tab, on that tab key on your keyboard. Then it becomes active. Then of course you select from where you want to start your addition up to the last cell. Then you can simply close that particular bracket and press enter. We have that. Or anybody having a challenge with doing a summation. Then having done the summation of that particular column, is it column B? We can now proceed further and remind ourselves. Did we talk about the Excel, or rather the cell referencing? I think we talked about it, but even if we didn't, we can maybe do a small recap. We said that basically we have three types of cell referencing. With the first one being, maybe you can remind me, maybe the three types of cell referencing. If we've talked about, you can chat. The three types. Yeah, I'm seeing we have absolute, relative, and of course the mixed. Thank you. So basically we have those three types of cell reference or cell referencing. And I remember we talked about how each of them works. So we said in relative cell referencing, basically if you are to copy that particular the cell, if you are to copy the reference in a particular cell and paste it into a new location, basically the cell references adjust to the new. For example, in this relative cell referencing, basically the only function that we have used, or rather the only cells that we have typed, is cell B3 to B10. So take into account, or take for example, now we want to copy this, Control C as a keyboard shortcut. Then we paste here in column D, Control V. You will realize that basically column D, or rather that particular function, adjust to the new location. So basically that is the relative cell referencing. Meaning if cells, for us to say a cell is relatively referenced, then it must be this way. As you can see, it is D10. D10. Then of course I'll also remind us briefly of how absolute cell referencing works. I'm told we have an issue with our capacity. Let me see if it's sorted. But as we proceed, maybe as we find solution to the others who can't join. So basically, that is a relative cell referencing, where the cells are left hanging. We talked about locking a cell and all that. Then we can copy this to the new column E. And by there, I also know hope we can drag across. So basically, for us to drag across, we simply look at, I think you can see that that particular cell which I want to drag its results across. You see it's now in green. Then of course there is this dot here at the tail end. Then we can basically drag it across. So basically your cursor will change to a plus. So once it changes to a plus, you can drag across up to the last particular cell, or rather the last particular results that you wanted to compute. I hope that's clear for using the sum function. And as we use the sum function, of course, we can now see how it's working. Then the other thing that we can do, now that we've talked about absolute relative cell referencing, the next one is absolute. So we illustrate as we move. Absolute. Now, for a good example of absolute cell referencing is maybe where we wanted to do a conversion. For example, maybe can I say we have some US dollars, we want to convert them into Kenyan shillings. So basically you can just add an extra sheet. Maybe we can just add an extra sheet. And for us to add an extra sheet, we said you press this plus sign. I think you can see where my plus is so that you have a new sheet. I think mine is giving me sheet 3. I'm not sure what yours will give you. Then so assuming we have maybe the transactions maybe of the group or rather the managing director. So transactions of the managing director, assume he had gone maybe for a meeting in the US. So your managing director had gone to a meeting in the US, and of course, assuming you had given him some credit cards, which he used to maybe do some purchases here and there. Then now we want to maybe record our transactions and find out how much we are going to record maybe in Kenyan shillings. For example, so let's say that in transport, in fact, we can talk about maybe expense here. Then on the next column, we talk about the cost, and the cost here is in US dollars. I think that is the symbol for US dollars. So it's in USD. The cost here is in USD. So maybe in transport, he used $75 while not maybe $750 while there. Maybe for lunch, he used maybe $320. Maybe on maybe airtime, he used maybe $50. Maybe on accommodation, he used say maybe $530 US dollars. And of course, maybe we have flight. So maybe for flight, let's assume he used $1250 US dollars. So we have these expenses against the cost, other the two. But now we wanted to find out how much did he use in Kenyan shillings. So how would we do that? Of course, assuming maybe just here, we have the Kenyan shillings per USD. So let's assume, what rate should we take as our conversion rate? $128. Thank you, Caro. So Caro is saying we use 128 as our, so basically one US dollars is 128 shillings. So we want to find out what will be these amounts in Kenyan shillings. Basically, for us to convert those US dollars amounts to Kenyan shillings, then basically we are going to have 750 times 128. So assuming that is the rate, we are also trying to sort out these other students who can't join, but I don't want us to stop. As they are sorted, we can proceed. So basically, for transport, we are saying he used 96,000 Kenyan shillings. Then, of course, I talked about relative cell referencing, where ordinarily we would have come up to the point we have that plus, then we drag downwards. So Matthew, if we were to drag downwards, we have the blanks. And why do we have the blanks? We can take one cell and see what it's picking. So basically for lunch, it's telling us it is 320 times, of course, just what is just below the 128. So basically that is now the relative cell reference, meaning it's adjusting automatically. If initially our cell, the cell that we had referred was here, and we have moved our cell downwards for our result cell, then of course it will be adjusting just the next one. If you look at the last one on flight, then of course you can also see somebody is writing on the screen. Of course, you can also see we have it adjusting to the new cell location here. So of course, that is now what absolute cell reference intends to solve. So for this transport, which was our first cost, or rather our first expense line, then we can find a way of making it not changing. In fact, that is now what we call it, making it absolute. So how do we make a cell absolute? We talked about locking cells. Huh? So kindly try locking cells as you tell me how we lock it. I think we talked about that the other time. So we lock cells by using the dollar sign. Huh? So as we introduce the dollar sign, we talked, your cursor should just be just after H3. Then of course you can introduce that dollar sign. I think I talked about introducing the dollar sign, how we introduce it. So you can see my cell H3 has dollar sign H, dollar sign 3. So of course we have locked that particular cell. So kindly be sure that you can lock a cell. Kindly be sure you can introduce the dollar signs. The dollar sign is just before your column and just before your row. So with that, we can say we have the results, then we can proceed and drag across or drag downwards. So taking into example, maybe the flight cost, you can see it's not changing. The 128 is basically constant. I hope cell referencing for absolute and relative is clear. So we are saying that this was a classic example of maybe how we can use at the dollar sign, or rather how we do absolute cell referencing. And we said that, or rather we've said that for you to use the dollar sign or the absolute cell referencing, then you must introduce the dollar sign. We took an example first of how our results were changing when we never had the dollar sign. And you realized that as we were dragging it downwards, this cell was also changing, moving downwards, the same as this other one. It was also picking just what is just below, up to the last particular cell. But now, of course, this 128 is only in one particular cell. So basically, what do we do to ensure that this 128, which is our exchange rate, is not left behind, meaning it's applied evenly to all these other costs, even as we drag downwards. Yeah, and we've said that basically we introduce the dollar sign into that particular cell that has the figures that we need for all our other computations. And we've said, how do we introduce a dollar sign? Basically, a dollar sign is introduced by using, by having your column, a dollar sign just before your column, and a dollar sign just after your column or just before your row. So it is basically before the column and after the column, or before the column and before the row. And we've talked about, I think I've had some lists there on how to introduce the dollar sign. Somebody said we manually introduce the dollar. We manually introduce the dollar sign by pressing, maybe there are some machines that you can press F4 directly, F4, and your cursor should be just after the cell that you want to lock. So you can have your dollar, your cursor there, then you press F4, or there's some machines that you'll pick Fn and F4. So you hold down Fn as you press F4. Then there are some machines that will require you to do it manually. Press Shift and 4. So as you press Shift and 4, be sure to know where your dollar sign should be. then you'll be having a dollar sign as illustrated here. Then of course, after that enter, you can now drag it downwards. Then you'll see it's the amount, the 128, rather the cell that contains the 128 is not changing. I hope that's now clear. Yes, so we can proceed to the next function. So we've basically talked about we've talked about the summation. Of course, you can also sum this so that we just universally apply. So sum of this. And of course, sum also has a shortcut. What's the shortcut of sum? It should be the shortcut of sum. Instead of typing sum manually, what's the shortcut? Alt equal. Okay. So basically, you can also press the alt equal. Like for here, I can simply say it's alt equal sign. Then it basically picks everything. I'm also told alt. It's not alt and it should be alt equal sign. Then you have your equal sign appearing. So you can also drag that to this other case so that you also do the summation for even the Kenyan shillings, rather the currency in Kenyan shillings. So that is one example of the. But we are. I was just communicating that we have a problem with our Zoom, so I think it's being sorted. So we can proceed to the next thing. So in our sheet, we're using sheet 2. In our sheet 1, we've calculated the sum of that particular data. So basically that was the total. Then we can also proceed and find the average. So I hope we know what average is. So again, we have that Excel function for average, basically equal to average. Then once the average, once the function you want to use is selected in blue, you can press tab, then you can do the average. So basically we know what average does. So it's basically average, then you hold down your keyboard, rather you left click, then you start from where you wanted to start up to the end point. Then of course you can have your average. For this case, I'm told the average is 63. We can of course drag that across because it's relative cell. And of course we have an error here. You have an error that in that particular cell. So of course the error is coming because we do not have any result here. We do not have any figures in these cells. So that's why we have that error, or rather we are dividing by 0. We do not have any numbers there. They are just all blank. So we can delete that. Then apart from average, we also have the median. We also have the mean. Average is the same as mean. We have the maximum. And of course we have the minimum. So how does it work? Of course, median, we will also say is equal to median. Simply equal to median. Let me see if it will give us a result. I'm told my median is 61. Meaning there are two numbers. So of course it's the average. Maybe if you were to do that manually, you'll also have that as the result. Then of course the maximum, we use which function? for maximum and minimum, which functions do we use? Which functions do we use for maximum and minimum? I'm told max, I believe that is for maximum. Yes, so max and min are for the maximum. So of course you can simply say is equal to minimum, Then you can simply select so that you see your minimum scores. And of course you can also do that for your maximum. So what is your maximum score? Use the max function. So it's equal to max function for your maximum score. So of course you can drag this to even these other cells and you'll still find results. Any question up to that point before we proceed further? So there being no any other question, we can proceed. Now, so we can proceed. For median, it's also just equal to median. The function is the median function. Just the same thing we were doing for these other ones. Now, we can proceed further. Now, similarly, we also have the if function. And basically, the if function, it's a function that is more of conditional. It's a conditional function, meaning once you introduce the word if, then it basically gives you results that meet a certain criteria. Meaning for you to use the if function, there has to be a criteria that must be met for that function to apply, or for that function to work. Take for example, if you wanted to find out what is the sum of results, or rather of scores that were above 60%. What is the total marks for those who scored above 60%, or what is the average of now student who scored maybe below 70? You see, meaning when we talk about now for those who scored a particular grade, then of course we are eliminating some inputs or some data from our computation. Meaning there has to be a condition that has to be met for maybe for us to calculate the average, or to calculate the product, or to calculate the sum of that particular result. So basically, that is now again what the if function tries to solve. So how do we use the if function? I want to challenge us. I want to challenge us to maybe calculate the total those who scored above 50%. So for those who scored above 50%, we can find their totals. The same way, we can also find the number of those above maybe 60%, right? We can also find maybe the average, maybe below 55%. So basically, that's are some of the instances where we can introduce the if. There has to be a certain condition that has to be met for us to tabulate, or rather for us to use that particular data in our computation. So we are starting with the first one. So we want to find what is the totals above 50%. Now, Usually, Excel provides syntax is like a guide. Syntax is like a guide. So Excel does provide us with a guide on how we can maybe do some basic computation. It's like a guide. You are supposed to move to this, up to the last step. So for us to calculate not above 50, we'll simply say is equal to sum, but the sum is conditional, meaning we are saying sum, we simply say is equal to sum if sum, if, meaning we're only going to add you once you a certain we are simply going to add you once you scored above 50%. So for this case, we are saying you sum if, then Excel is asking us what is the range. So basically, I talked about that guide, which we refer to as a syntax. It is here just down. So just below your formula or below your function, you have that tool, that guide, sorry. So how do we use it? So what is the range? We need to define the range, the first thing. So how do we define our range? So range is more like which set of data are we looking up to? So basically, we want to find our totals from this set of data. So basically, that is our range. Then a comma. Then the next thing it's asking us is the criteria. So you can see your criteria is in black, or rather it is bold. So how do we proceed from there? We now have to tell Excel what is the criteria of for us to add this particular result. How can we which one are we going to add? Like, and what is the condition that has to be met for us to use that particular data in our computation? And of course, here the criteria is above 50. So above 50, we have to understand well the the signs, the greater than, the less than, the equal to, the not greater than, not less. I hope we know them from our nursery, not nursery, but primary mathematics. Good. So what is the condition? So the condition here is above or greater than, above, I think this should be the sign for above 50. So above 50 is the condition. And of course, the condition has to be in quotes. It has to be in quotes, double quotes. And it should not be two single quotes. It should be just a double quote, not two single quotes. Then of course, you also close that particular. And I hope that is clear. Now up to that point, we are clear, then we can proceed. Then we simply say enter. Of course, we have that sum range. That sum range is usually optional. You can either have it or you can leave it for this case. For this case, you can have it or leave it. Then, of course, you simply say enter. So for my case, I'm told that the number of the students who scored above 50 had a total of 422. So that is the totals above 50%. Then you can move to the next one. Of course, we can drag this across. We can drag it across. I hope we know how to do that. Then the next condition that you want to find out is now the number of those above 50. the number of those above 50. So how would we find, which function would you use to find the number of those above 50, above 60%, I mean? Good, count if. So we are only counting if a certain condition has been met. So for this case, we will simply say equal to count if, then the range, of course, the range will remain constant. Then of course, your double quotes, then greater than 60. Then of course, your closing quotes. So I'm told the number above 60 are 4. And of course, you can also do that for average. So average below that, average below 55. So of course, again, for that case, we simply use the average if. You can try that out as well. So what is our average below 55? How much are we getting? Average, if how much are we getting? Average, we are getting 41. Let's see, I think it must be 41. So average below 55 should be average if. So average if. So average if this, comma, our condition was greater below 55. So was that then below 55? Yeah, so it's coming to 41. So basically, those are the simple if function. We refer to them as the simple if because they are very straightforward. But of course, we have that guide which Excel offers for us. Then we can proceed further and now try out the long if function, the longer functions, the longer if functions. But we can start with one which is relatively not long first before we proceed to the longer first. Now, maybe on just our, on this column, the column for totals for each student, we can get the totals for each student, the total scores for each student that we have here. So we can do that total per student. So we can find out what's the total marks per student. So of course, we will also simply use the sum function is equal to sum. Yeah. Yeah. So I want us to try now a little longer if function, though not very long, but a little long. A little longer to a little longer if function. Now, maybe one of the other functions that we can use for this particular student, assuming you are a teacher, maybe teaching a particular unit, or maybe you're the class teacher, for example, and at the end of the student, maybe we must have a commenter. maybe against the performance of each student. So of course, there'll be a pass mark. Which pass mark do we give these students for you to pass? How many marks should you have scored? We can give them a 270. So basically, if you have 270, you've passed. If you have below 270, you have failed. So which function are we going to use to rank? Not really to rank, but to classify these students in those two categories, either a pass or a fail. We're simply going to use the if function. And I said again in our last class that a function has to begin with an equal sign. So we'll simply say is equal to if, the if function. So basically this if function is a little longer. So we either have the syntax is giving us if logical test, value if true, value if false. So if logical test. So the logical test is basically here. We want to find out if is this cell G3 above 270 or below 270. In this case, we are only using one cell as our reference point. But McQ, in a school, you can have as high as 1,000 students in Form 1 or in Form 4. So you can't be basically doing it for each and every student manually. It will take you a lot of time. So we can use this if function to do that classification for us. So we are saying if G3, which is my totals for the first student math, is greater than 270, comma, yeah. So that is the logical test. We are testing whether the student scored above 270 or he did not score above 270. And of course, if we say above 270, then 270 is not above 270. Anybody who has 270 will be given a fail. I hope that's clear. Above 270 is not 270. The only figures above 270 starts from 270.1. So if you score above 270, of course, you must be having 270. Otherwise, maybe we would say above 269. So if you have above 270, comma, double quotes, pass, double quotes, yeah. So if true is pass, that pass should be in quotes, double quotes, then comma, another double quote. What if you do not have 270? We give you a fail. We give you a fail. So basically, if G3 is greater than 270, pass, in quotes, comma, opening quotes, fail, closing quotes. I hope that is clear. G3 is relatively referred, meaning as we will be dragging downwards, it will be picking G3, G4, G5 up to G10. Then I can simply say enter. So once I have enter, it's giving me the first person as having failed. I can of course drag that downwards, then I can have results. So we have those who have passed and those who have failed. So that is an if function. So basically that's, you're complaining about my sound. We couldn't hold our last class because I was sick. That's Japona Vizuri. I've been in house almost throughout the week, so you'll pardon me. I'm still not that strong, but I'm trying. So that is now as having a comment against each student, meaning we use the same if function. A condition is met. If you've not met that particular condition, then you are given maybe a different comment. So that's why we have that comment column just there. You can proceed along that if function. You can proceed to the other if function, maybe for a little longer if, particularly now, the one I'm interested in is the one for grading students, for giving students particular grades. So I hope my mic is now okay. Winfred, I hope my mic is now okay. Haina interference. So thank you. So okay, thank you. So we can proceed further and maybe categorize now students depending on what they scored. We can give them a particular grade. So I had this classification here. I hope you can see that classification of mine, where we are saying if a student has 75% and above, he has a pass. If he has below, not below, but 65 and above, he has a B. If he has 55 and above, he has a C. And if he has below 55, we are giving him a D. So we can use that classification to, of course, now rank our students. So maybe you could see we can insert a column just after B. If you want to insert a column just after B, then you don't select B, you would select C because you want it to appear just next to or where C is appearing. Then you right click, then you click on insert. Yeah. So you select, if you want it to appear mbele ya B, then right click, then you click on insert. Then, of course, now we want to give these students grades. So we are assuming if you scored 75% and above, we are giving you an A. If you had 70, not 70, but 65, you have a B. A 55 is a C. And below 55, of course, we are giving you a D. So how would we do it? We'll again use the if function for this case. So how will we use it for this case? So we have our title as a grade, our label. I hope you also remember the label, the values, the functions, and formula. So that's the grade is our label. So be sure to insert your label. So So we are saying for you to do your grades, again, we'll use the if function. So basically, we are trying to classify. We'll be saying if this particular cell or if this particular student scores 50, then he has A. If he scores 40, he has C. So it's still an if function because there is a preset condition that has to be fulfilled for that particular function to apply. So we'll say if the logical test. The logical test, I said, now if B3 is greater than 75, comma, that is the logical test. The logical test for this case is B3 being greater than 75. Then, of course, opening quotes, we give him a grade A, then you close. Up to that point, I hope you have captured that right, because if you capture it wrong, it's a little bit longer, meaning if you capture it wrong, you may be having problem. So if B3 is greater than 75, then comma A. The A should be in quotes, then another comma. If, meaning we introduce another if, because we are not sure what this guy has scored. So again, if he has, if still this B3 is now greater than 65, comma, B, comma. If now B3 is greater than 65, he has a D. Then if now B3, if now the same B3, we are referring to only one cell. Only one cell. Because we are assuming we do not know. There are so many cells that will be following basically the results of math because we have a number of students, right? So we are still saying if math now scores, if that particular cell is greater than 55, comma, C, comma, if, yes, no, not before, we don't introduce another if B3 is now greater than 55, it has a C, otherwise a D. For the last one, you only put a comma, then you do double quotes, grade D. Meaning for this case, we are saying his marks, yes, it's possible to use greater than or equal to. Mark, I say, if we've specified our B3 to be greater than 75, then of course, if you have a 75, you won't be having an A. Because 75 is not greater than 75. It's equal to. So of course, you can also use greater than or equal to. Yeah. But if you only use equal to, then of course it won't be giving you the results of the guy who has 76 or 80. It won't be picking. So after the last one, which is grade C for 55, then of course now if you're not specified within the range we have tried to specify, then we are giving you a D. So for that D, we don't need to specify again. We don't need to introduce a new what? A new if function. We can stop it at that point. Then we close our brackets, and we are closing our brackets by the number of brackets tulifungua. I think we opened how many? We opened one, two. We opened only three brackets. So you'll close you are working with only three brackets. Then of course we are told this guy now had a D. He had a D. Then we can now drag across. In fact, this is a classic example. The guy who had 75 do not have an A. He has a B because 75 is not greater than 75. So we said it's greater than 75. Of course, if you wanted a guy with 75 to have an A, we would be talking about greater than or equal to 75, right? Greater than or equal to 75. Yes, of course. Of course, if you now use the ifs function, then of course now we're talking about more than one if, right? Yes, so of course that should also be giving you results. Yeah, so maybe we can take a health break of 1 minute as you finish it up. Then we proceed maybe in the next 10 minutes. I want to go see a doctor. I'm not feeling well. Then we can stop at around 7:15. So maybe you have the next 1 minute just to synthesize that before we proceed maybe with the next thing. Okay. So I think that was a good break for us. So basically, that was a basic introduction to basic computations. Maybe let me just open my book notes so that I see. So we've talked about the if functions and this basic computation. So um, hmm, I'm not having much. I think in our next class, we'll talk about the lookup function. Of course, it will take a little longer time so that we can finish the introduction on Saturday. Maybe for the sake of those who have not joined us, I'm told our Zoom has a small issue. I think it will be sorted by Saturday. Then they can, then we can now move together. So I think that is the only thing left for our introduction part, the lookup functions, which we will cover on Saturday. Then now come next week, Thursday, we can now start average below. So we said we are using just the average if function. The average if function is what we've used. You've said average, you've talked about average if. So of course the range was this one, then below now you use the below sign. That is the less than. The same as the other functions we've been using. So I'm also having a proposal. I think on Saturday I'll see if maybe we can have time maybe from the school so that we have our classes from earlier, a little earlier, as opposed to us having it at 6. So